And Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom, good evening. Welcome to Liberty and Friends, your weekly news wrap-up show here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Sihle Ngobese, Big Daddy Liberty. Goodness me, people, it is very, very cold out here in Johannesburg. So I'm hoping you are wrapped up and super warm. Get a warm beverage whilst you're at it. This is the one long format show that I have. We are going to be together for about 90 minutes with a wonderful panel of key thinkers from various organizations and independent groupings too. Before any of that, let me just quickly remind you, if you are keen on supporting the Big Daddy Liberty Show, you can do that, of course, by just checking out the descriptor of this video, whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or on YouTube. This is Liberty and Friends. Let's get the show going. We have a rather jam-packed show. Pardon me, dear viewer, if you see me looking down. Quite often my laptop screen is down here. That's where I get to see your comments too. Speaking about comments, get those comments going, guys, and let's keep the engagement high. Please hit that like button. As soon as you enter the stream, please hit that like button. Let's keep over 50% engagement, please. Let's get those likes up. I'm seeing only 7 so far collectively. So just as you're listening to me waffle away, hit that like button. Right. Speaking about doing things that I like, as Stephen Biko once said, I write what I like. In this case, I bring on to my show who I like. And the first guest I'm going to bring on, a chap who I've had on the show before. I always love hearing this gentleman's insights. I can see him looking pensive at the moment. There he is, Ernst. Homie, how are you doing? Welcome to the stream.
Hello, Sihle. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. There's always very relevant topics going on here, and I always like to share my thoughts there. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Yeah, and for those that don't know, I work for Afriforum. I'm a campaign officer there, and then I also have my own YouTube channel, and I post on Twitter and YouTube under the name Concious Caracal for those that might not recognize my name there in the bottom. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the show.
Absolutely. Apologies for that. I will make those changes in the descriptor. I got a little bit held up with uploading a certain video, which you'll see here tonight. Welcome to it, Ernst. Good to have you on the show. The next chap, again, someone who, can I put it this way? I've been to war with this homie. I'm going to bring him on right now. Gabriel Crouse from the Daily Friend publication, a journalist in that part of the world. Homie, welcome to the stream. How are you doing?
Oh man, it's a good weekend, and what a way to finish it up. I'm very glad to be here. Thanks, Sihle.
Absolutely, brother. Good to have you. One of my favorite Chris's, if I can put it that way. I have 3 Chris's that I totally respect and enjoy hearing the views of. One of them is on the stream right now. Chris Hatting from the Free Market Foundation. But Chris, how you doing, homie?
Well, I'm kind of upset that you have other favorite Chris's, but I guess I'll let that slide. This is my favorite kind of family meeting, so thank you for having me on tonight.
Homie, good to have you, dog. Very good to have you on. And last but definitely not least, someone who is a key part of the Big Daddy Liberty Show, Joe Emilio, the host of the Joe Emilio Show. Joe, Etara.
Hey, Sihle, thank you so much for having me. For those of you who don't know, my name is Joe Emilio, and I too have a YouTube channel. And I'm also a comedian. But it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellento, Joe. Good to have you on. Let me just double check. I can't see. Oh, there you are. Sorry, there's 2 screens that I'm working off. I just couldn't see you on the main screen. Welcome to it, Joe. And I said last but not least, but I was wrong. Another firm favorite and someone you've seen before on the show. Let's see here. I think there's a little bit of a glitch, but there he is. Talking, of course, about Marius Roodt, who is, of course, from the Institute of Race Relation, an analyst and a key thinker in that part of the world. Marius, good evening.
How's it, Sihle? How's it, everybody? Just to let you know, I haven't been on this show before, but I've been on some of the other shows. But this is my debut on Liberty and Friends, I think.
Have I never had you on LMF?
No.
Welcome to it, guys. I hope you have a warm beverage or just a dope, because we are about to warm it up on this a Sunday evening. Remember, every Sunday at 8 p.m. is Liberty and Friends, your news wrap-up show with a revolving panel of guests, interesting key thinkers, guys who help me analyze and give opinion on the news headlines that got us talking this week. Speaking about news headlines that got us talking, guys, I'm going to begin with the Clown World organization that is called ESCOM. And dear viewer, relax. We will get to what the squirrel said a few minutes ago. We'll get to that, but there are bigger issues and things that I really care about. Guys, ESCOM, two major things that happened this week that I think deserve a little bit of attention, and I want to get your views on the first. The newly appointed CEO of this organization, a one director, has been on a crusade. I can call it nothing less perhaps than a crusade of making attempts, whether we believe they are effective or not is another issue, but making attempts nonetheless to clean the organization up. And I want to bring in something here, because the headline that caught my attention this week was of a one, pardon me, dear viewers, a one
Peter.
Solly, Solly Chitanga, who was the chief procurement officer at ESCOM. Now, I bring this issue up and I bring the story up because a couple of weeks ago, this same gentleman who was the chief procurement officer at ESCOM had actually played the race card, the one card in this country that is a game that is played by all political elites. He played the race card against the narrator in what was then, now we know, an investigation against him, alleging wrongdoing and procurement issues and blah, blah, blah. The issue I want to bring up here is actually the race card itself. It is something which is often used by the politically nefarious to detract and to take away attention from their often criminal behavior, morally dubious behavior, and play into a trope that a lot of South Africans are very sensitive to. Ernst, I want to begin with you because there is another issue that I'll bring up that your organization was actually at the front of. But your thoughts on this incessant use on the race card to detract?
Well, Sikhle, it's pretty much what, as you summed up there, it's the bread and butter of every corrupt cadre in this country. I mean, it's pretty much the go-to move once you're being forced into a corner. The other go-to move, if you don't use that type of race card, or the racism card rather, is to claim that there's some type of imperialist foreign conspiracy against you. I mean, that's the other one we're waiting for. So maybe we're going to hear that line somewhere in the future. But no, I think looking at the reaction that, again, this story has gotten, just another case of a politician or a person caught up in corruption using the race card as an excuse. You can see that South Africans are getting tired of it, because I think it's not just that it is a little bit overused, or that there's a kind of a pattern or a kind of a disproportionate use of it. No, it is so often used in the South African political landscape that it's becoming almost like a joke. It's almost becoming a joke on its own. So, I mean, I saw today Eusebius McKaiser also throwing his toys out of the pram because his racism everywhere narrative was falling apart. And what I found funny about it was the fact that in his tweet, where he is pretty much acting as this white knight against racism, he refers to all white South Africans collectively as 1652s. So, I mean, the last thing I'll say to that is pretty much, I think this window that Eusebius is seeing all this hate and racism through is actually a mirror in the end.
I mean, again, it's absolutely laughable. Gabriel, let me come to you. And, I see racism everywhere. This incessant narrative being driven, as Ernst has rightly pointed out, it is often by the political elites and really the chattering classes in this country, the mainstream media. When you and I have had a conversation about this already, insofar as we've pointed out with hard data, there is a big difference between the political elites and how they use and appropriate race as a weapon in society, and ordinary South Africans who, on an everyday basis, don't see race as the major factor to their day-to-day lifestyles.
Yeah, Sihle, it's an amazing thing, and I think Ernst struck on both sides of it that are very interesting. The one is the psychological side. If you're seeing something everywhere, then maybe it is just you. It's your own psychological issues that are projecting. From the political side, there's an incentive story. There's a systemic story. It works. It works because people that know better don't say so. And it's worked. Oddly enough, in a way, the original sin of this race card thing, at least as far as the Zuma story goes, is when he accused Bulelani Ngcuka of being impimpi. Because if you're a black guy, then it's hard to say you're a racist, but then you can say you're an apartheid era spy. And of course, that myth was then debunked 2 weeks later, but people kept propagating it. And that really was how Zuma's narrative was born, that he's not guilty. He's a perfect angel. It's just that people are going after him because they're following an apartheid agenda, or Israeli, Mossad, or CIA, America, or rogue unit in SARS, Indian racists, anything. It had to be kind of ultimately connected to a white or imperialist project, and it was very bad. So what are we doing about this? The Institute of Race Relations has, I think, one of the key ingredients to solving this problem. So part of it is we have to go out and we have to analyze and we have to cover the main news and see when this kind of thing happens and point it out and address the issues case by case. But part of what you have to do is speak to ordinary South Africans. And that is a difficult thing to do for any one person. So you hire a company to do surveys with thousands of people, random, demographically representative, rich, poor, rural, urban, men, women, black, white, the lot. And then you ask them, what are the major problems in South Africa? And what you hear is unemployment, crime, corruption, not even corrupt leadership, widespread corruption, failure to housing service, housing problems, service delivery problems, education problems, health problems. 3% say racism, 97% say something else is the major problem or the major two problems. That's our latest survey. Then you ask people, well, what's going on here? Have you personally experienced racism in the last 5 years? And 80% say no. And it's even higher amongst black South Africans if we disambiguate by race. So most people are not experiencing racism personally in the last 5 years. Now, there are obviously 20% who do experience it. And you say, yeah, we've been to war together. I have seen you being attacked on the basis of your race, oddly enough, by, I don't know, people who share the same race but feel you're a traitor or something because you're not a statist. And I've had a little bit of that in the course of my work, but it's unusual. It's like my job takes me in that direction. When I'm just going about my business, it's not like that. So then we ask people, do you think, if you're not experiencing racism personally very much, and you don't think it's a major problem, there's much bigger problems, why is it always in the headlines? And we ask people this question directly. You could paraphrase it as, are politicians playing the race card? But we say, not to use the metaphor, we say, are politicians talking about racism and colonialism to excuse their own failures? And most South Africans say yes. So I think you're right. Most people are now full of this thing. It is turning into a complete joke because it's so overused and ridiculous. And I mean, I'm very excited to say that we are launching a website called Racism is Not the Problem. And this is the first official announcement of it. So people who follow Big Daddy Liberty, you guys are on the cutting edge about figuring out the cool stuff. Please go check it out. There is going to be some very interesting stuff popping up there, starting tomorrow night or June 1st, but going through the month. And we'll see where it goes from there. There's also going to be some nice street activity around it. But I'm not going to spoil all of the surprises. I'm just going to say racism is not the problem, is the precondition to figuring out what is the problem and solving it. Absolutely. And we want to solve problems.
Absolutely. And there you go. You heard it first here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show, Liberty and Friends. Just drop a bomb, as I said that, on behalf of Gabriel. If I had the sound effects, I'll do it for you, Gabriel. But thank you so much for that. And again, maybe even as I say that, let me cross over to Joe, because Joe, we've kind of had these conversations, in our chats offline, about the complexities of race in a country where it is often weaponized by the political elites. But unfortunately, it isn't something which is just exclusive to South Africa. We see this even in other parts of the world.
Yes, unfortunately we do. And I mean, I think it's ironic because most of it does come from a woke ideology and wokeism, if you will, started with the whole, I want to be awake to seeing racism around me. And that ideology just kind of snowballed into what we have today in some places, even America. And we see it in Europe and, other countries around the world. And it's been weaponized. And it's crazy because, as Gabriel said, and yourself, like when you do the right polling, no one really cares about race, because at the end of the day, every single South African, any normal human being that wants to provide for their family, that's what they want to do. They want to provide for their family. They need a job. They need to put food on the table. They want to send their kids to school. They want to just buy a car, buy a house, get the title deed, and that's the way to do it. Nobody really cares about, or at least even in my, going out and hanging out with people and friends and meeting people at shows, no one's treating me badly. No one's, I may have gotten one racial slur many years ago, but, South Africa is a place, and people just want to have fun. People just want to hang out. We want peace. And the way that the elites of this country go about it is like ridiculous. And I 100% agree. It is just a narrative created to distract people from the failures of the ANC, and that narrative starting to have a lot of cracks in it.
Absolutely. Let me bring you in, Marius, because there was context to why I wanted to have this conversation about the race card. And I've kind of lost it a little bit in this chat, but I'll reel us back in by reminding us that the particular ESCOM chief, the former chief of procurement, who I began the segment with, it's symbolic that he got fired, because it was after a protracted hearing into his conduct and the like. But 2 or 3 weeks prior to this, he went big in the mainstream media, having alleged that the CEO of ESCOM, a Derator, I can't think of his first name for the life of the love of him, Andre Derator, had accused him of racism purely based on the fact that he was a white male coming in, cleaning corruption, and his main charge, this is Solly's main charge against the race, was that he's coming after black companies. So clearly his whiteness, if I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, clearly his whiteness was just objecting to the idea of ESCOM, awarding contracts to quote unquote black companies. And that's why he was coming after Solly at the time. This was before, of course, he was fired, as he now is. But there was another, when I read that particular piece, there's another issue that came to mind that happened last year, I think November, if I'm not mistaken, a case of 2 Northwest police officers who were actually eventually fired, if memory serves me right, for having made false accusations of racism against their commanding officer, who was primed to discipline them. I'd forgotten what they had particularly done, but there's some grievous act that they did as police officers, and their commander, this was 2 black police officers, with their commander being a white lady. These 2 then, sorry, I thought of the word in Zulu, when you...
Collude.
Collude, thank you. These 2 police
You
officers...
can say it in Zulu, we'll translate.
These 2 police officers then colluded with each other to basically set a false accusation against her in the hopes of getting her fired. And of course, as the theme has now been, to deflect from their own behavior. Let me bring you in on this one, Marius, your views on this kind of behavior, because it does seem that there is a growing impatience as society, including the courts in this case, to this behavior of playing the race card.
Well, I think part of the issue is if everything is racist, then nothing's racist. If any time a white person criticizes a black person, or what happened at ESCOM with Andre de Ruyter, if that's racist, then real racist behavior, then we actually lose the real racist behavior that still occasionally happens in South Africa in the noise. And it's for me, I obviously don't know Andre de Ruyter personally, but I cannot believe that somebody will get appointed, a white person will get appointed to ESCOM by the current government. So, and this person would be, racist in any way. And we all know there are real social consequences to being a racist in South Africa today. You just have to ask somebody like Adam Katsavelos or the late Penny Sparrow. if you come out and say something that is explicitly racist and you get caught, you get into big trouble. Or Vicky Momberg, I think she's also a good example. So, and as I say, it's if we say everything is racist, then nothing becomes racist. But I think I'm open to correction here. But with the issue of the 2 police officers, I believe the reason why they were actually convicted is because a black police lady came and said she actually heard these guys talking to each other and saying they're going to, starting to talk about this conspiracy to get their commanding officer into trouble. So I think we also have to give kudos to that lady who probably under a lot of pressure came and said, did the right thing. And she was probably called all kinds of horrible names. I mean, you've been called those kinds of names, Sichle. I mean, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. But also just want to echo especially what Joe just said. I mean, I think at the end of the day, South Africans and actually people in general are all pretty much want the same thing. They want to have live in safety. They want to have a future for their kids. They want to be able to have enough money to live in a decent place, go on holiday once a year, or go back to their village or whatever the case might be, depending on what kind of thing you like to do over December. And I think, to use a term of a lot of our opponents, in my personal lived experience, I find that race relations seem to be in pretty good health, actually. But I mean, we read about incidents that still happen. We saw what's happened in Caracal last year, for example, in Piet Retief. But I mean, a lot of that is also, I think, stoked by a lot of the elites in South Africa, who often, or the political elites especially, who try to, use this kind of thing to cover up their own failures. I mean, this is an issue that happens around the world. And if it wasn't racism, it would be something else. It would be tribalism, or they blame, I don't know, Scientologists or something. It's around the world. So it's a phenomenon where people try to. I mean, in India, it's a good example. Muslims are seen now under Narendra Modi. Muslims are the reason for the problems in India, for example. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's not a phenomenon in South Africa, but obviously because of the history of our country, it's the race issue. But yeah, I think as I say, in my personal experience and from what Gabriel was saying, the polling that the Institute of Race Relations has done, I think all things considered, race relations in South Africa are in pretty good health, actually.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And Chris,
if I can just can I make a quick comment there on something that Marius said?
Yep.
No, just because you mentioned Vicky Momberg, I think that's an excellent example to show you false accusations of racism in South Africa in regards to if you are falsely accused of being a racist or saying something racist, you can cite that case of Vicky Momberg and then say, well, this is a very serious accusation that you're throwing my way. If this is proven true, I will go to jail. If not, you need to show some major evidence, because in the end, it is pretty much like someone accusing you of a serious crime. And like I said, we have the example of someone going to jail for it now. So if you are the victim of a false racism accusation, you need to treat it like any type of false criminal accusation, like someone calling you a murderer or a rapist, basically, because that's what it is in the South African context. I don't think people need to shy away and not try to defend themselves. They need to stand up. If they know what they are and they know it's false, they need to stand behind the shield of truth and behind with their own self-respect and with their shoulders broadly, and say, no, if you don't provide any evidence right now, you're going to have to apologize to me on the spot because you're calling me a criminal.
Absolutely, Chris. It's something which is often quite a feature, unfortunately, in the societies where political elites have appropriated a lot of power for themselves in a very sort of centralized way. There's this attempt, therefore, to deflect away from that which I would argue is the issue in any society like ours, for example, by using things like race, gender, and the like. For instance, I tweeted this morning a reminder to viewers that, something like critical race theory is cultural Marxism. It's actual Marxism that is sort of being pushed through a new lens, a different lens of not just class, but, culture, gender, and the like.
Unfortunately, when a country or a society heads in a direction where more and more people think in collectivist terms, you'll see this, I guess, from one group versus another. And you get that generally from the elite that wants to hold on to power, that quote unquote speaks for a certain group or wants to favor a certain group. So you're going to see it more and more and more when political parties get more desperate. They want to be seen as the saviors and the ultimate body on which people need to rely. So you'll see more collectivist rhetoric when political elites get more more desperate, unfortunately. And again, it goes back to your views on wealth creation, on redistributionism, transformationism, all that sort of stuff. And you need to always look at what's sort of lying behind it. It's not just isolated. It's not just a case of one race versus another, one gender versus another. It indicates, I think, something a bit more desperate behind it. But I think, as Marius is right to point out, the South Africans, despite the best plans and machinations of government, try and still look after each other and care for each other and do the best they can. I just finished reading Tony Leon's book, Future Tense, and at the end of the book, he talks about how soup kitchens, community action groups, churches, mosques, a gift of the givers, everyone tried to look after each other and care for each other because they value each other. It's not a case of you only have value if you're a part of a certain race group or a certain religion. People want to look after each other. So, to go back to your original point, the more government and political elites are desperate to hold on to power, the more you'll see them pushing that rhetoric. But we simply have to push past that and continue pursuing values that we think is important, like caring for each other.
Can I just say one thing about cultural Marxism?
Sure, very quickly.
So I just think it's curious to note that Marx himself predicted that communism would be born out of the richest and most sophisticated nations. And instead it was born out of the most backward, wonderful, wonderful place. I love Russia, but out of the most backward of Europe's major powers, Russia. And the build-up to that was the largest explicit race movement in Europe, really, of its age, which was the Pan-Slavic movement. When you hear Yugoslavia, Yugo means South, South Slavia. The whole of World War I started because Slav nationalists said all Slavs have to be together. German Teutons must be one side. Ottoman swarthy people must be the other side. Anglo-Saxons must keep their distance. Franco-Gauls must keep their distance. And what we need to do is liberate the Slavs from the non-racial Austro-Hungarian Empire, because the Austro-Hungarian Empire had room for Jews and Christians and Muslims, and also for Slavs and Teutons and Anglo-Saxons and the like. And Gavrilo Princip put a bullet through Archduke Franz Ferdinand's head, kicking off World War I for the express purpose of bringing people together by race, the Slavic race. Now, in South Africa, we don't always think of Slav as being a race, but you can go to Russia and you'll still find people who think a little bit that way. And the next point after that is when Lenin took over, one of the first major debates and breakthroughs where he impressed his leadership was to say, I want communism to spread, if it must, by racial means. So if this race group wants to get together and have communism for them, and the next one wants to have communism for them for that race, each race can have its own communism, and then eventually I'll tell them all what to do. That was kind of his plan, and then he died, but the plan survived. And critical race theory, I'm just saying, it's not a stretch. It's baked into the fundamental implementation of Marxism. In fact, it's the only abbreviation is one might say that it's cultural Leninism. Or it's Leninist communism rather than Marx himself, but it's very much how communism has been practiced in most of its instances across the world, including in China, where the Han Chinese attitude towards anyone who didn't qualify as being properly within the same race in the 60s and 70s was atrocious. And to this day. Anyway, side point. It's nothing new.
With that being said, we are at the half-hour mark, 8:30 that is. It's not the halfway mark yet of the show. Welcome to it. If you're watching, this is Liberty and Friends, your Sunday evening news wrap-up show. I'm in conversation with Ernst van Zyl from Afriforum. He's with us tonight. Gabriel Crouse from the Daily Friend, writer, analyst, and journalist in that part of the world. Marius Roodt from the Institute of Race Relations, with Joe Emilio, host of the Joe Emilio Show, and of course, Chris Hatting, who is from the Free Market Foundation. Welcome to it. Grab a warm drink. We are about to go into the next topic. Fellas, an interesting week of one Julius Malema, the wonderful symbol of great leadership in South Africa, who this week, after telling us for years and years and years that he cares about Black people, he would say that the EFF's mission is one of improving the lives of Blacks and Africans in particular, a phrase that they have coined and used and take from the ANC. And that my personal favorite of referring to Blacks, why they need to roll out socialism, he tells us it's for the African child. They'll tell us the poor African child who's been neglected by colonialism and apartheid. That same guy that same guy who claims to be for the African child, who claims to stand for blacks, then said this to a fellow member of the Pan-African Parliament. Roll the clip.
Adjourning the House. I'm adjourning the House. Point of order. Point of order. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. Point of order.
Yo! EFF members, that's your boy. That's your boy. Comfort your boy. He's actually telling a member of parliament from Mali, that he wants to kill him. Let's go outside, he says. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. Let me come to you, Marius, excuse me, because again, we've laughed about these issues before, but we've always said that Julius Malema is literally the slung in the cross, a true example of what Shakespeare argues in all of his work as being the appearance versus reality.
But I don't think even his appearance isn't that different from what really happens, because people got surprised, or not his appearance, but what he says in public. I mean, I remember people got all surprised when the EFF comes out and says, certain journalists aren't welcome at their press conferences, and Julius Malema says strange things about journalists. Floyd Chivambu physically attacked a journalist at the parliamentary precinct. He grabbed a guy from News 24, I can't remember his name, by his throat. But I mean, Julius Malema has never pretended to like journalists. If we go back, I think it was 2010, when he chased Jonah Fisher from the BBC out of Lutuli House, when Julius Malema was still head of the ANC Youth League.
You bloody agent!
Exactly. And he said he was a small boy with nothing in his pants or something like that. And I mean, it's just ridiculous. And then 5 years later, whatever the case is, people are like, I'm so surprised that Julius, he doesn't really like journalists, or he says these things like, Julius Malema has never hidden who he is. And also when when Muyaseni and Lozi, he said it's where there was that journalist that was getting shoved around by EFF guys outside of Clicks. And then Muyaseni and Lozi said, it wasn't really assault. They were just, they weren't really touching her and stuff. But let's also remember, this is also the kind of thing, we shouldn't be surprised that people in the EFF think like this, because during Jacob Zuma's rape trial, we all remember what Julius Malema said about the lady's name, Kwezi, said, when a lady sleeps over and you give her taxi money, that means she had a good time. So it's impossible that she was raped. And I mean, whatever we can talk about, I mean, obviously Jacob Zuma was found innocent or found not guilty at least. So, but I mean, there's obviously lots of funny things that happened at that trial. And I think we can all agree he probably did take advantage of somebody a young person who, by all accounts, is probably, she was, I believe she wasn't, she had some mental problems and so on. So even if he didn't rape her, he definitely took advantage of her. But be that as may, I think it does tell you something about the EFF, the way that Julius Malema spoke about her. He's spoken about also, whites and Indians, and the way he's spoken about journalists. So all this stuff, it doesn't surprise me. And if Julius Malema ever becomes president of South Africa, people must be surprised, like, we can't believe that he's calling for the killing of whoever, I don't know, pastors or whatever. He's not against violence. We would see.
To that point, Chris, let me come to you because, we've seen this type of behavior before from especially the likes who appropriate the ideas of, being red in tooth and claw Marxists. Let's take just to the African continent. We have a character, one Mobutu Sese Seko, who, in his rise to power in what was then Zaire, or actually he named it Zaire, to be honest, but the Congo. In his rise to power, left a bloody trail of dead opponents and enemies and the like. But the point I want to get to here is, these individuals who you see the warning bells of a propensity to violence, and then those people, being the sort of people who really want state power, the ability to marshal state violence against people. A warning bell, Chris?
Yeah, Marxism, socialism, communism, these all ideologies fundamentally premised on the use of force. So it's dressed in the best rhetoric at some point in the glorious revolution of the people, but at some point your elected officials are going to have to use force to implement their grand vision to attain whatever level of utopia they need to attain. So it even then breaks down what's supposed to be race solidarity, class solidarity, that sort of stuff. You can't have disagreement with the leaders who are leading you to the promised land. You can't disagree with their plans and what they want to do with you. So whatever the disagreement was between Malema and the particular gentleman in the clip, if you disagree up to a certain point, they're going to use force. And never be surprised when socialists and communists say and do violent, when they say violent things and violent ideas, and when they actually do them, I mean, action follows from ideology. So don't be surprised.
Ernst, let me come to you because, again, Chris brings up a very important point here. The party itself, the EFF, went as quiet as a church mouse when the media then started coming to them to say, guys, here's your boy threatening a member of parliament from Mali with actual murder. The party went absolutely quiet. And I tweeted this week something to the effect of, you know, the EFF, of course, will never be able to say anything about Malema, and it won't say anything about evil because it is led by evil.
Well, Sikhle, what we see here is pretty much Julius Malema choosing a very bold approach. He's choosing to try and achieve African unity through death threats. Now, this is not something that it should take us by any surprise. What we're seeing here is pretty much the end result of utopian thinking. Pan-Africanism is utopian thinking. It is historical revisionism. The African continent has never in its history been united. There's never been racial unity or whatever they want to call it on the African continent. It's always been a struggle between different factions, different cultures, different religions, you name it. And what Julius Malema and his utopians here are trying to do, or if you look through their actions and their rhetoric, it pretty much demonstrates what Peter Hitchens always says about utopia, and that is that utopia is on the other side of an ocean of blood and you never get there. There's a reason why the paradise in the Bible is guarded by an angel with a flaming sword. This is exactly what the pathway that utopian thinking leads. So seeing this clip from Julius Malema is not something surprising. It's pretty much just the manifestation of someone whose mind has become possessed by an ideology of utopian thinking. And specifically also a historical revisionism, whether he does it actively or unconsciously. And maybe just a final thought there, it's very interesting for me to see how you get these. This is not the first genuinely controversial outburst from Mr. Malema. He's said some vile stuff in the past. But then you still, up until this point, it seems like a lot of people in the media are kind of waking up to the type of man that he is. But I mean, we've talked about now how the treatment that the media have gotten from the EFF, but there's still a lot of people in the media, we have to be frank, that still coddle the EFF as this, they're harmless, they can't do anything, don't be too mean to them. They're just a robust, exciting new party that
contribute to democracy.
And these same type of commentariat and opinion piece writers have said that Helen Zille is a bigger threat to our democracy than Julius Malema. And it seems that they're much too busy fighting the real threat to our democracy, Afriforum and the IRR, rather than the people that are constantly throwing around death threats, threatening people, saying that they're not going to kill a certain race group, at least for now. People saying they're going to cut the throats of whiteness. I mean, here's the picture-perfect textbook example of a threat to democracy and someone that is a genuine dangerous politician. But now let's focus rather on the Institute of Race Relations and Afriforum and Solidarity and the Free Market Foundation. Those are the real evil oaks that are threatening racial harmony and peace in this country. It really just shows where the priorities of the media have gone astray.
It's frightening. And Joe, let me come to you, Gabriel. I'll end with you on this particular one. But Joe, all week, or I shouldn't say all week, but almost immediately when I started posting about this issue and raising the specter of this is the real Julius, and if he's like this now without any real state power behind him, what does he then become when he has state power and presumably the way he wants it, soul use and soul being able to have the soul exercise of that said power? What does he then become like then? I then had a line of EFF supporters doing the mental gymnastics required in order to justify these comments and say, no, on the one hand, I was told he wasn't really threatening to kill him. He's just basically saying he's going to kill him with kindness. They must just go outside, he'll kill him with kindness. Or my personal favorite. Well, it's okay that Malema says he'll kill this other African because Cyril Ramaphosa was killing people in Marikana. I was like, what?
Oh my God.
Would you like to fly the bunny once again? But Joe, it's almost like cult nature of EFF, where his most zealous supporters, acolytes, I can't even call them supporters, acolytes, or do anything to justify the defense of their despot.
Oh, he's the Marlon Manson of South Africa, just on a much bigger scale, I guess. You know what? And there's a lot of people that are going to probably, I'm going to piss off some of his hardcore supporters. He's the next Hitler. He's the next Hitler if he comes to power. It's as simple as that. This man will stop at nothing with his ideologies and that are so misguided beyond belief. And you know what? You mentioned his followers and how misguided they are and the things they say to defend him. I'm still confused as to how he thinks saying something like that is okay. How he thinks going on a stage and saying, kiss the boer is okay, followed by bra, 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 like it is scary, the things he guides everyone, because he'll say on the one hand, hey, I care for my African child, I want to see them grow, I want to see them have opportunity, all that stuff, but every single ideology that he wants to put in, EWC and the rest, is going to kill that African child, and no one has the guts to call him out on it. No one, mainstream media is very quiet. They love the EFF, but not because of what they say, but because it's that newsworthy, hey, there's something exciting happening at Brackenfell, let's go check it out, and just basically race baiting, continue that race baiting. And that's what the EFF does. I don't think for a second that Julius Malema ever left the ANC. I just think he created another faction of the ANC, the militant faction of the ANC. And Julius Malema at some point needs to be stopped. Now, I don't mean that in a violent way. I mean, the law at some point really needs to catch up with him. He's dodged and circled around words and tiptoed and done, and but I meant this and I meant it like this, and that's not really what I said. No, at some point, and maybe in this case, I think it's very hard for him to pull out of this one. I don't think it's going to happen for him.
Well, Gabriel, let me come to you. And there's two distinct points I want you to chew on this particular issue. The idea of Julius and his cunning and slithery way of being able to avoid consequences completely. This is the same guy who had once said, quote, "We're not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least not yet," close quote. Same guy who said something like that. And the media even then were fawning over this guy. Oh, he doesn't really mean that. He basically meant that, if nothing changes, whites will be slaughtered. Like, what?
Yeah, he's just a maverick.
The underlying point he was making here. That's the first point. When Gabriel, that I wanted to chew on, this idea that he mouths off, and there's often no consequences, even when there's actual direct incitement. Because for me, mouthing off is not the issue. Like, we all have free speech, but when you directly incite the violence, as he always does, and always commonly does, there's no consequences. Number one. Number two, talk to me about the almost David Koresh-esque nature of him, the cult leader of the 21st century, that the image that he appropriates, sort of I lead Omsham Rico, or I'm going to be on an island somewhere and I'm going to give everybody cyanide type situation. This guy is the 21st century version of a cult leader.
Yeah, I like that. And I saw the word cult coming up in one of the old the comments down there. And I think it's, just to take the broader ideology of the EFF is something like critical race theory, is something like cultural Leninism or cultural Marxism. And sometimes I hear people saying, race has gotten to the stage where it's like a religion for some people like Julius Malema. I don't like that myself because I respect religion. I respect the Muslim religion, the Christian religion, the Jewish religion, Buddhists, and so on. I think that there are great things that are achieved when people hold their hands in faith and worship the ineffable majesty of life and the daunting prospects of death, funerals, weddings, all this kind of thing. Religion is good. You mustn't malign the word like that, in my opinion. It's a cult. It's exactly the right word. He's a cult leader. It's a cult of personality. It's a cult of race-based ideology. And we've seen this before. it is the worst mistake you can make not to take someone at their word when they are a cult leader.
Yeah.
You ask people in Europe in 1940 whether if they had a magic time machine to go back to 1930 and just believe what Mussolini and Hitler and company were saying, they would all take the opportunity to revise their behavior, with the exception of those that didn't. And those that didn't were at the forefront of putting a final stop to the thing. Now, in our context, I think it'll be easier to put a final stop to the thing because the organizational capacities of the Red Berets is nothing compared to the black shirts. This is a small blessing, but it's not nothing. When we were in Piet Retief from Kondo, for example, I spoke to people who showed me the Facebook groups and what was happening there, where EFF leaders and ANC leaders were hounding people who spoke truth to power. People who said, look, there's been this universal condemnation. You're saying these two white people terribly, racistly killed these two innocent work-seeking black farm workers. Well, it turns out the testimony contradicts itself, is contradicted by video footage. It turns out on the best available evidence, one brother killed his own brother, who the one had a job, the other one didn't have a job. Anyway, let's not get too lost in the details. The point is that people who spoke out were hounded by the EFF and then had their businesses stoned. There was one butcher in particular who was identified by EFF branded people on Facebook. And then when the rocks started flying, the first business that was attacked was his butchery. And they said, you must go for that butchery. Now, that was just my second experience in Mpumalanga in 2 months. The time before, I spoke with a dozen workers at a sawmill who all said they are afraid to go to work because EFF people are threatening them directly. They're all black people. They all want to go to work. The EFF guys say you are puppets of white monopoly capital because you believe in going to work. And that has very real and very material consequences. And to go a step further, the EFF, yeah, you know, the media does love them. But really, I think a part of the reason the media loves them is that they're like the expanded outsourced youth wing of the ANC. And the media really struggles to confront ANC ideology or policy as a problem. They go after the personnel, one scapegoat or another. Ace, oh, well, okay, he's terrible, but the rest is all fine, right? So the media that's fawning on the ANC, it needs a foil that's like, okay, part of the reason the ANC is good is because they're not as crazy as the EFF. But what has happened? Yeah. Julius Malema tabled a motion to expropriate property without compensation. The ANC seconded that motion. At this stage, most people my age and younger in this country do not have a job and haven't had a job. We had 2 technical recessions before the virus and after EWC was tabled in Parliament. That is already an immediate consequence. And we know from, American data and so on, that when you increase unemployment, you increase murder, you increase the rates at which people die because they can't get the right medicine or things go wrong, suicides, all kinds of terrible things. So yeah, Malema might have threatened to kill this guy and not actually killed him. But I really think on the most sober and judicious analysis, his policy proposals, his contribution to South African political discourse have already led to people dying in a systemic fashion. By changing the system in this country, after Zuma, we had a chance to go one way or another, and we went the EFF's way in terms of the grandest threat to our safety and security as citizens. And Malema was right at the tip of that spear. And I can't name the people that have died as a consequence of this because it's in the nature of this kind of systemic screw up that you can't actually pick out one individual or another. But if you look at the murder rates in this country, if you look at the unemployment rates in this country, I really don't think, and you look at the connection between that and our policy movements backwards, I really, really don't think it's a stretch to say he already has blood on his hands by punting bad policy. And yeah, if you like that, more to come. As was beautifully put, the river of the ocean of blood has got many, many, many drops. If you want to get to nirvana, you can keep going that way.
But you're never going to get there, Gabriel, and that's what I think. And I saw someone in the comments asked, but why shouldn't we strive towards Pan-Africanism? Well, there's a lot of things that people have strived towards that are noble ends in terms of how it's described, and it ended up with millions of people dead. I don't think there's ever been a dictator in history that admitted, yeah, I'm just an evil guy, I just want to kill people. Like, no, it's always towards
Yeah.
utopia. It's always towards a noble end. It's always, but the ends can never justify the means, because the means
there's
employed,
a funny story about that.
Determine the ends produced.
Kwame Nkrumah was the first grand Pan-Africanist he was the first president of Ghana, which in some ways was the first decolonized country in Africa. And he was very popular and he was doing very good things. And when he died, journalist Alistair Sparks was at the funeral and he described the cabinet as expressing many deep sighs of relief, because they said he was a very good guy until he made Ghana's project second to the Pan-Africanist project. Then what did he stop doing? Solving Ghana's problems. What did he start doing? A bunch of silly race-based games. And he's right. It's just not practical. It's not like it would be a bad thing if the AU could run 20 times better than the EU and there could be a free market. I like the idea of expanding trade, by the way. That's something that should happen on the African continent. It's ridiculous. You go to Breitbart Bridge and you sit for 2 days in the queue just to move your goods north. That's ridiculous. There's real solutions to be solved, but that's not to be solved through Pan-Africanism. That's to be solved through concrete, practical attention to detail. And you see a problem, you solve a problem. If your problem is that there's white people or colored people or Indian people, then you can't solve it in a human way.
I think a point to make about Julius Malema just is how they've they don't really have any principles. I think a very good example is just how they've dealt with Jacob Zuma. I mean, Julius Malema was one of Jacob Zuma's greatest cheerleaders before he came to power. Then he obviously they started hating each other. Julius Malema was kicked out of the ANC, formed the EFF. Was Jacob Zuma's mortal enemy, and now suddenly the EFF is supporting Jacob Zuma once again. So they just do, and I mean that's just one example. I'm sure you can find probably almost countless examples. And just one last thing to say about it: Dalian Mpofu was at the time, I think he was EFF national chairman, but he's still quite influential in the EFF. He wrote an op-ed in the Daily Maverick entitled "The Indian Question," about the problem of Indians in South Africa. And if anybody knows their history, we know what prior to World War II and the Holocaust, there was the Nazis were talking about something called the Jewish question. And we all know what happened after that.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're dealing with people here who are, again, when you don't know history, you repeat it. You are doomed to repeat it. You can have a situation where the EFF has a manifesto that is almost carbon copy of the Nazi manifesto ahead of that election, and no one bats an eyelid. You can have people who say things like, well, you shouldn't stress too much about Julius. He's just a passionate person. And I tell these people, if we were in Germany in the early 30s, you'd probably be saying the exact same thing about, Adolf Hitler, who in his speeches too, very passionate. A lot of big pictures you see of him talking, he's got this sort of demeanor. And, and I'm like, no, guys, it's...
Yeah, well, he was Times Man of the Year.
Yeah, because he called for peace in Europe. Just no Jews.
Like, again, and I saw a comment earlier on from someone who's presumably an EFF member taking umbrage with the tone of this conversation, and use the usual card that they play. Oh, Big Daddy, you're trying to be white. Look at your panel, it's white and blah, blah, blah. And he's ignoring the fact that his very leader, I just played a clip of his leader actually openly saying, I will kill you, to a fellow African. So again, square that circle for me. But anyway, speaking about circles, we've come full circle in the 8th hour, or nearly. It's 5 minutes to 9. 35 minutes left in the show. I must move us on, gentlemen, to other issues. And let's quickly touch on the one president of this republic, who Cyril Ramaphosa. It's Cyril Ramaphosa, who, again, appeared before this country in order to keep the COVID grift, as I like to now call it, going. This idea that South Africa is in this big crisis of, COVID-19. There's people dying left, right, and center. And as we were told, this third wave is now coming, and we need to obviously, ratchet up the enforcement of these asinine rules. Chris, let me come to you. I'm hoping you watched the delivery of this what I put in speech? Your initial thoughts, firstly, on some of the things he said, but also broadly, our approach to the so-called disaster and what is now really proving it isn't a disaster, it just needs rational public health approaches.
Well, just a few thoughts. I mean, if anything is a disaster, it's an unemployment rate of more than 42%. And to me, going up another level of lockdowns and having a stricter curfew affects restaurants, it affects those businesses. So are you really that compassionate about people's jobs and people's livelihoods? The second thought, I didn't hear the words Zweli, Mkhize, digital, or vibes once this evening. And if we are that concerned about eliminating corruption and addressing the issue of fewer vaccines, why not address that problem where money went to marketing and that kind of thing, where it didn't go to vaccine procurement? And then thirdly, he mentioned, and this is a personal sort of interest area of mine, he mentioned intellectual property rights and a potential waiver on the TRIPS agreement at the World Trade Organization, as though waiving IP rights will automatically build new know-how and manufacturing in South Africa and we can manufacture our own vaccines. The pandemic has provided an opportunity for governments around the world to look at their own policies and ideologies and why they're in weak positions economically, socially, with unemployment. The South African government continues to place responsibility and blame on other governments, on other scapegoats, instead of assessing why the country was in such a weak position before the pandemic.
No, absolutely. Marius, I'm going to come to you briefly and then to Gabriel. There's something almost laughable. There's something almost laughable by people who continue to hold on to this idea that the government will be suddenly the same government who right now, I'm sitting in this little flatlet with no water, I haven't had water the whole day, and really by the sounds of it, a third of Johannesburg doesn't have water. Hey man, we're starting to smell like sour worms up in here, as I said earlier on. The people who believe that same government that can't deliver on even the most basic of things suddenly will have the miraculous ability to stop the spread of a virus, even though it gaslights us into calling it the worst public health disaster in the 21st century, which is clearly not true at a 99% recovery rate worldwide. But this continued insistence, almost even assisted by their friends in the media, that you've got to panic over this thing and only the government will save you.
I just want to quickly make a point that I live in Edenville and I never get load shed and I do have water, so people should stop mocking the East Rand maybe. So that's yeah, but I mean, I think
no. All right, please take him off the screen now. Thank you.
But yeah, but I mean that's an excellent point, Sigley, and it boggles the mind that everybody knows nearly everything that the government touches in South Africa. They have the reverse Midas touch. Instead of things turning to gold, they turn to something else. I mean, we know they're from Eskom, we know they're from the health services in South Africa. We've seen it now with the vaccine rollout. I mean, we're behind places like Afghanistan. Zimbabwe has vaccinated more people than South Africa. And it's crazy. I saw somebody tweet that with the whole thing happening with William Mkhize, this means South Africa is not ready for NHI. But even South Africa will never be ready for NHI because it's a terrible idea. Even if we have the most virtuous people in charge of this, how much 400 billion rand fund it's going to be, or whatever the case is, it's going to be inefficient. There are going to be a lot of problems in the system. There's going to be, people aren't going to be tweeted on time. We see what's happened in Canada, which is a very, generally speaking, a well-run country and stuff, and they have a single-payer healthcare system, as far as I understand. And there, people can sometimes wait over a year to see a specialist. And there's no. To solve the healthcare problem in South Africa, we must not destroy the private sector. We need to strengthen the public healthcare sector and get as many people as we can into the private sector. And to do that, you need to ensure people have jobs, they have the money to pay for the medical aid, whatever the case is, and get people away from government reliance, because that's the only way. That's one of the biggest problems in South Africa. People, through no fault of their own, often have to rely on the government for social grants, whatever the case is. And I'm pretty sure most people who survive on social grants would much rather have a job where they can provide for themselves and their family and not be reliant on somebody else. And same with NHI. I'm sure most people, if they had the option, would rather be able to pay for medical aid for themselves than be able to, and not have to rely on the failing government healthcare system, which I'm pretty sure outside of the Western Cape is pretty much close to collapse, I think.
And again, I must come to you, Gabriel, and then Ernst, and then Joe. there's this weird insistence on arguing that it is only science if it is said by the state or it is approved by the mainstream media or even social media. Let me cite an example very briefly, and it's on screen now. Where I wanted to go. A lot of people have already had this virus. I've had this virus, and it's on that basis I've argued, for instance, that there has been and continuing to be a growing immunity to the SARS-CoV-2 variant of this virus. And that anybody who then contracts it again, and by the way, this is not just my opinion, I've actually cited papers on this show, and I've even given you the links to those papers that have demonstrated ably that once someone has had this virus, either one of two ways, getting it naturally and going through it and becoming better and then having the antibodies, or B, as is currently the preferred method seemingly by the mainstream, getting a vaccine, that you have a reasonable amount of immunity heading forward, and that even if a new variant comes, your body has a pathway to developing the antibodies to fight this. This last bit that I mentioned seems to be something that no one wants to talk about because there is a whole there's a zeal, if I can put it that way, to get your vaccine right, get your vaccine. And if you don't get a vaccine, you're evil, blah, blah, blah. Talk to me about something like that, the perverting of science to suit a political agenda to a large extent.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the vaccines are not perfect. There are some risks involved. The risks of dying if you get the disease and develop natural convalescent immunity is greater. So I think a good idea is to get the vaccine if you can, and you get it from a reliable spot. But as you say, no one wants to talk about immunity or herd protection or anything like that. There are a few reasons for it. Here's one. South Africa had the longest lockdown in the world, the longest hard lockdown in the world. We also had by far the most irrational lockdown in the world. There's nowhere else where they were banning open-toed shoes and bikinis and cigarettes and e-commerce because WMC might profit off of the plague and so on and so forth. It was just very, very extraordinary what kinds of bans we've implemented here. And yet, in August last year, the top scientists in the country actually looking at this thing estimated that somewhere around 20% of the country had been infected. By September, it was looking like 25%, maybe 20 to 33% was Discovery's estimate. So that was humiliating because it was the worst national infection rate on the planet. So we had the hardest lockdown. We started with the most unemployment for a peer country. That got the most worst. We had one of the worst GDP knocks from such a low base. And still, we didn't stop the plague. In fact, we seem to have spread the plague. And I think we did by putting people into hunger queues and starvation mobs, and by disrupting, getting people out of workplaces where they can actually keep some social distance and keeping them in small, highly densely populated areas where they sit on top of each other. And it's very hard not to spread the disease. So I think the government did a great job at spreading coronavirus. I think of all of the governments in the world, South Africa might have done the best job at spreading coronavirus. Now the data is not fully in yet. We'll test that claim. Maybe we'll only come in 5th on the planet in terms of spreading the virus. Maybe we will rank the best. We'll see how that works. But in the meantime, no one wanted to talk about the good side of it. The good side of it is the more people have recovered, the harder it is for death to spread by the virus. And if you look at the best estimates coming out earlier this year, it was already more than half of people have been infected. So in terms of getting vaccinated, I think that if we were serious about this and we looked at how few vaccines we have, because stupidly the government decided that it's going to have a monopoly on the vaccines, and even more stupidly, private businesses that could have made a difference sat back and allowed that to happen. It's a flippant disgrace. Instead of giving their customers the choice, you can choose to have it, you choose not to have it. They said, no, let the government have the choice to figure out how it's all done. Because of that, we've had extremely low vaccination rates. As Marius said, it's less than Afghanistan and Somalia and Zimbabwe. It's completely embarrassing. What we should be doing, if anything, is prioritize those vaccines for people who haven't been infected. Everyone who gets a vaccine should first have to get an antibody test to see if they've been infected or not, because if they have been infected, their odds of dying are so much reduced that you're basically as likely to die from a lightning strike while walking outside. It never goes to zero, but it goes into that wash of the background noise of risks that you take. I mean, the risk that you take driving across Johannesburg is a non-zero number, but you have to do it now and then. That's what we should be doing, is saying people who've recovered from the plague are now in a position where their risk is much reduced, and we should prioritize the vaccines for people who definitely haven't had it yet and who have comorbidities and are older and so on and so forth. But if we did that, what would happen? You would expose with even more hard evidence how many South Africans already have the antibodies, and that would embarrass the government, whose entire story is predicated on the idea that because we've had the hardest lockdown, because we've banned booze and cigarettes and open-toed shoes, therefore we don't have coronavirus, excepting in a few unfortunate pockets. So it's just the worst of all worlds. And on top of that, we've got one of the worst increased excess death rates in 2020 on the planet. I don't think that's all from coronavirus. I think that a lot of that's coming from exactly the factors I was talking about earlier in regards to Julius Malema, the factors of how poverty kills. People have been dying of poverty in this country, and we're not addressing that with Ramaphosa's speech. We're not addressing the best science on herd immunity, and we're not addressing the best science on how to think about vaccination. So we're literally ticking all the wrong boxes.
Absolutely, guys. And there's a link here. And Ernst, let me come to you and then Joe. There's a link here, perhaps, as to why, as Gabriel put it, we're not addressing really the issues that we should be looking at insofar as wanting to beat this COVID-19. Because I must say this for the purposes of the comments and for the purposes of YouTube. We're not saying COVID-19 doesn't exist. We're not saying SARS-CoV-2 doesn't exist. Although, Joe, I'll look to you for a next issue that we'll talk to about that particular question. But for my purposes, I'm not saying this virus doesn't exist. What I'm saying is the approach the state has taken, the statist, government-centric, politician-heavy laden approach that we've taken is absolutely useless to beating this virus and really giving ordinary people the ability to exit this current madness that we're in. And Adam, let me come to you to this particular point, because I would argue, therefore, that there is an incentive by the political elites to not want to adopt a rational approach, and that actually the current status quo of them controlling everything in this particular and dealing, with COVID-19, they have an incentive, and let's look at one Zwelim Kize as a prime example of this. The revelations that then popped out. Shout out to the Daily Maverick that did the investigative work of this. Shout out to them on this. I might have my gripes with you guys on some other issues, but I can't fault you when it comes to the investigative journalism. To then point out that, Uprazweli, the health minister, has actually been dishing out cash, allegedly, to his friends via this current, he's actually been doling out the cash via the piloting of what will be the NHI, the National Health Insurance. And when the COVID-19 situation came on, physically doled out millions to friends who then set up a communications company in order to communicate on this disease and basically make the minister look good effectively. Talk to me, because there's a conversation to be had here about, number one, when you give politicians almost exclusive power to decide winners and losers in society, the winners inevitably will be people who are friends of those politicians, number one. And number two, the reason for picking them isn't even to assist people, right? In this case, provide healthcare. The reasons are just, here's a mate of mine, he needs a few millions. Some of those will come back to me to allow me to run for this election again. And that becomes the whole nexus, if you will, and the reason for why we see the political elites wanting the state to control something like the COVID response.
Absolutely, Sihle. And maybe just a quick comment there, seeing as Gabriel said that the ANC actually helped the virus spread. I think the solution to stopping the virus in its tracks is quite clear. We just need to give the ANC a mandate to spread the virus. Then it will completely disappear and we'll never see another infection again. I think that's exactly what needs to be done. Unfortunately, that's not what's going to happen. No, Sihle, in regards to the revelations now with Dr. Zwelim Kize, I think this just shows again that the ANC is rotten to the core. What you see here is just a vast patronage network. Corruption has seeped into the very foundations of this party and the government structures that are at their disposal. So in regards to in regards to really my favorite thing that the good doctor told us was, I didn't personally benefit from any of this, but he fails to mention that it's family and friends. But I mean, maybe he just neglected to mention that. But I think there's a myth that needs to be dispelled here, and the myth that needs to be dispelled is the fact that there's a good and a bad faction within the ANC. That there's a corrupt faction, and then there's a faction that's fighting the good fight, and Cyril is at the lead and he's at the helm, but he's being held back by some imaginary forces or whatever. No, it's pretty much just a good cop, bad cop routine, but both cops work for the same corrupt police station. That's what we're seeing with the ANC. And whether it's Ace's RET faction or Cyril's New Dawn faction,
Cyril is also RET. What is more RET than expropriation without compensation? And that's his signature policy.
Yeah, we've seen, and it's not just expropriation that we've seen come to the fore under Cyril Ramaphosa. We've also seen, I think and I don't have the statistics on hand, but I'd like for someone that's good in statistics to dig into that. I think we are well on our way to have more hours of load shedding under the New Dawn government than we did under the Zuma government. But I'd like to see at the end of Cyril Ramaphosa's reign what's going to happen there. So maybe just to sum that up in regards to this factionalism, I think if you're going around talking about if just the good faction within the ANC wins, there will be reform and then everything will be fine, you're pretty much just saying that, there's two crocodiles that want to eat me, but at least one of them brushes their teeth, so we need to hope that he wins. No, you shouldn't be rooting for a crocodile. You shouldn't be rooting for an evil faction. You shouldn't be voting for evil. Don't just say I'm rooting for the lesser of two evils. Refuse to root for evil. I think that's a very reasonable stance to take. So in regards to the ANC and how rotten it's become, I think when you have a party that's looted funds from the sick and the vulnerable during a pandemic, if you are still making excuses for this party, you are venturing into territory where that is an immoral act and it should be treated accordingly.
Absolutely. Joe, let me come to you, and I'll end with you, Chris, because we must move on, guys. We're nearly in the last 15 minutes of the show. Time does fly. Joe, there's something laughable, isn't there, therefore, by people who continuously then tell me, especially when I say something like, look, personally, and I must say this with the disclaimer it needs, because I know it's going to happen out here in these comment sections. Oh, what are you saying, Daddy? Are you anti-vaxxer? No, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm about to say this as a personal preference. I have already caught the SARS-CoV-2 virus. I've done a vlog on this particular issue where I took you through what I went through, and I showed you the results of my blood tests and all of that shebang. And that's why I gave you even the data, the science around what the science says is the immunity. So I'm actually trusting the science. Not that science is some dude in a dark alley that I have to decide whether I want to trust him or not. But hey, I'm not going to take the vaccine. If anything, as Gabriel pointed out, I would love for this vaccine to be prioritized to the elderly who haven't had this virus yet. And that's if the vaccine has been proven to be safe, because that's the other issue in this particular issue. But anyway, I'd rather it be given to those who haven't had the virus in order for us to increase the herd, if you will, of those who've had it and who have the antibodies within us. That would be my ideal in terms of what the science also says around this issue. But there's something laughable, and this is what I want you to chew on, Joe. There's something laughable about people who then even persist in telling me that I must listen to the same politicians who are stealing from me. Some will even come onto my comments and say, well, it doesn't matter how much they steal, they're black, and you've got to support them because we blacks have gone through a whole bunch of things, and these whites, they're the ones who want to benefit from. Guys, I'm not making this up. This has been said to me. People are saying things like, oh, these whites are the ones who want to eat nicely when it comes to COVID-19. It's time for us blacks, they'll tell us, to be the ones to be our beneficiaries in this issue. Talk to me about that person who tells me I need to still take that politician seriously, even as I'm watching mostly black people die from the bad policy decisions made by those same politicians.
Sikhle, it's really, it's heartbreaking, to see people fight. And it's actually in the way that you say that these people attack you, like that's what the ANC is so good at doing, the people's war. Every single topic we've spoken about tonight is a topic that basically divides the people, and not just divides amongst white and black, or Indian versus colored, or colored versus white, or colored versus black, but also white on white, black on black, colored on colored. It is all these topics, and unfortunately the virus has also become one of these dividing topics. Are you going to take the vaccine? Are you not going to take the vaccine? What do you believe? The misinformation, the information, what is deemed information? We don't know. Well, we do know and we don't know. It's confusing, and everybody just feels like it's the righteous thing to listen to the ANC. And rightfully, as you said, so just now, you said, oh, you want me to listen to someone who loots the country? You want me to listen to some a government that from my fellow man, that wants to implement these policies that will not only destroy South Africa but kill millions of people, and yet they're so oblivious to it. And to those kind of people, I say, well, one, they're trolls probably, and number two, let them believe in what they want to believe. Everybody must just do what they feel is right and keep on going on and fighting for what they believe is right. If that person wants to enforce or make you do something you don't want to do, at the end of the day, it's not illegal to not take the vaccine, at least not yet anyway. So until that happens, everybody's free to do whatever they want to do. And yeah, that's my opinion on that. And I just want to also quickly to Ernest's point as well. The whole thing about the ANC and it being rotten. I had Andrew Whitfield on my show not too long ago, shadow minister of the DA, shadow minister for the police. And he said something that I 100% agree with, and I hope people will understand what we're trying to say. We're trying to say that the ANC is not just evil. They will say that, oh, there's a few rotten apples in the system. Well, what people need to realize is the whole barrel is rotten, and no matter how many good fresh apples you put in there, they will rot as well, because the whole barrel is rotten.
Absolutely, no two ways about it. Chris, I wanted to actually end this segment off with you. Guys, we are running out of time. We won't be able to cover all of the issues, but Chris, I wanted to end the segment with you because there's something. How do I even broach this? Okay, there's something frightening for me by people who would rather real progress was held back. Real progress was held back so long as they could have their favorite politicians be at the helm of the current status quo, messy as it is. What do I mean here, Chris? Initially we had a situation where the state believed, and it still does, that it can control all variables, it can account for all things, the millions of transactions that happen in a society. It can account for all of those things. And when a vaccine comes, this is before the vaccines came, when the vaccine eventually comes, it'll be the sole arbiter of firstly who gets it or who doesn't, and the rollout thereof. And this bubble is clearly bursting now. It's bursting. People are realizing the state is absolutely useless, including ordinary South Africans, some of whom were told at the early onset when the vaccines came that some people were even crossing into Zimbabwe to get the vaccines because they just didn't trust the South African. There you go. I'll come to you, Gabriel. But people were crossing into other countries in order to get this vaccine. Talk to me, Chris, about the again, I'm going to be blunt. It is stupidity to believe that government will be able to look after us in this particular instance. Before you respond, Chris, let me say quickly thank you to you, Deborah Olivier, for the 140 Rand super chat. Shout out to you, girl, for the support of the show. If you want to support the show, you can do exactly that. You can send a super chat if you're on YouTube, or the information is in the descriptor of the video. Chris?
Thanks, Hichle. I want to give you time to get onto any other final points that you want to cover, so I'll be quick. So you're alluding to what Hayek was so very good at illuminating and illustrating with the knowledge problem, the idea that bureaucrats and politicians have this enlightened knowledge. It also comes from Plato with the philosopher kings, that they have knowledge to decide how people should act and how they should live, that somehow they can devise intricate schemes for how society should function. The fundamental aspect of the free market is voluntary interactions between people, not having the state interfering either through force or fraud to determine how people should live. And as you mentioned about getting the vaccines, procuring it, the problems of state inefficiency, when you have the states, governments giving companies indemnity from the consequences or the negative effects from vaccines, maybe that tells you something about the whole rollout and how that's going to work. You want them to have that position of power, and you're going to allow them to not bear the consequences of any negative aspects from the vaccines. And just a final point for more in-depth discussion on the NHI itself, the FMF hosted a discussion the past week with, amongst other guests, Professor Alex van den Heever from WITS. So I recommend people go to our YouTube channel and also to the website just to read up more about the NHI and the problems associated with that. Thanks.
Absolutely. I co-sign that. Gabriel, I'm going to come to you just now in a moment. But there is something that Sideliner Opinions is raising here on the questions, which for me is at the heart of why I call the current response to SARS-CoV-2 a grift by the state, the COVID grift, hashtag COVID grift, as I call it. There has been a lot of money made by people who have been picked by the states to be winners in this particular instance. Those, for example, who conduct these PCR tests, which have been found to be an unreliable way of gauging really the onset of someone having the SARS-CoV-2 virus because of the high cycling rate that is used. Again, I can't go into the detail of this because we don't have the time. But it's made me, for example, now that I know about this, question the reliability of the data that is used by the state overall as to the number of people who have this virus. Gabriel, let me come to you, please, briefly, to just wrap up the segment, and then we must go to the last issue.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, not every country has completely screwed this up. So Israel's done really well on vaccination, for example, and there's interesting versions of how they did that. But generally in the Far East, you see a lot of great responses in terms of protecting lives and livelihoods. And I'm thinking here about Taiwan, Japan, Singapore, to some extent Mongolia, Vietnam, and so on. And the thing that they all have in common, excluding communist China, minimum lockdown. Most of those countries, no lockdown at all. Minimum force, maximum voluntary choice. And it turns out human beings are smarter than governments. That is a test that has been run before, and it was run again in 2020, and the results are unambiguous.
Gabriel, but didn't you see you said they're excluding China, but didn't you see like they beat the virus like flipping a switch, basically? If you go look at the stats, they just turned it off.
Yeah, I'm not sure about their stats. Also, I have a very long piece arguing for why you should take seriously the thought that they actually designed the virus. Covering a lot of science, referencing very serious professors internationally and so on. You're welcome to check that out in the Daily Friend. I must say my trust for the Chinese Communist Party at the moment is negative.
Yeah, absolutely. They totally
was it ever positive, Grant?
Was
it ever positive, Gabriel?
Let's not get into that. We have to move on.
No, I was about to say they totally dribbled us on this issue. I mean, I always say to people who tell me about how great China is on this issue, I'm like, where them videos at? Or people dying in the streets from SARS-CoV-2. You remember that shit at the beginning? People just like dropping in the street and those ambulances coming out and picking them up. Hey, man, we got dribbled by them Chinese folk on this issue. But let me move us on, perhaps, guys, to the last issue. But before I do that, on the show, we were going to speak about the conflicting messaging of the state. Because on the one hand, it's been trying to fearmonger about the third wave and all of this. On the other hand, with a forked tongue, the same government, through the Department of Education, had then said, well, all the kids can go back, all the kids between grades R and 7 can go back to school. And a lot of people, therefore, were saying, well, how's that possible? You've been telling us there's a third wave coming. We need to brace ourselves and prepare for the worst. And on the other hand, you're saying all kids can go to school. Again, this is what happens when you have a single entity appropriate the power to communicate on this, but have nefarious agendas behind it. Guys, I'm going to move us to a lighter note, perhaps, as we close. Or I shouldn't say a lighter note because people have lost jobs on this particular issue. I'm talking, of course, about Musica. Musica is a age-old favorite of those of us who are old enough before the days of streaming and all that good stuff. When we were still going to get a cassette of Puze Chemist, we used to go to Musica to sort of sift through and spend a lovely afternoon looking for music. And that store, has now closed. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is this is how the market responds, or rather, this is how businesses respond to the market when the business is simply not there. Musica has recognized that there's no business, they don't have a future, and they couldn't adapt fast enough, and opted to then obviously do the rational thing of close. Chris, I'm going to begin with you, because we don't see the same behavior of responding to a market with state-owned enterprises who we just continue to bail out and bail out.
Yeah, the vanity projects that are South African Airways and Eskom, those just continue because they can have the taxpayer bail them out time after time. So they're not subject to market forces. You can have new CEOs and new boards, and we can say Andre de Ruyter is doing a relatively better job at Eskom than others. But fundamentally, these businesses don't have to respond to market and consumer supplies and wants. Eskom is the only company in the world that asks its customers to use less of its product. Because it's in such a difficult position. It doesn't have to deal with actually improving its services to customers, because the state and the taxpayer will always bail it out. I will say it's of course very sad that employees at Musica are going to lose their jobs, but so the market functions, creative destruction. Perhaps they can find better jobs, they can find other different things that they might find more value in, and maybe live better lives. In the long run, who knows what's going to happen. I will say I'm surprised that the Minister against Trade and Industry, Ibrahim Patel, has not tried to make it illegal for Musica to close down and not to close jobs. But maybe I should stop talking.
He should have mandated them.
Yeah, don't give him ideas.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Guys, one more time.
The Free Market Foundation is secretly, we run the government. So there we go. I've let the mask slip now.
Let me come to you, Marius, very briefly. I mean, I know you're someone who is an audiophile. I don't know if I'm crossing my wires between. Yes, I'm right. Something like music closes. Again, Chris was right. It's absolutely sad that it's happening, but it's also a life lesson to those who are in state-owned enterprises. I think the penny's beginning to drop amongst them too. I mean, you look at an organization like Denel, where this company, the state-owned company, is month after month saying, guys, it's dubious as to whether we'll be able to even pay our salaries at this moment. It does seem to get, there's a belief in my view that the message is beginning to drop, that the state itself is beginning to feel the pinch.
Well, I just want to point out that Musica was apparently making a profit still this year. It's because they've been winding down that division of clicks properly. They've been when stores weren't making money, they shut them. And apparently, I was just looking at Hilton Tarrant. He's a journalist at MoneyWeb, I think. Apparently, Musica even opened a store last year because there was a gap in the market for whatever reason. Obviously, that store is going to get closed this year. So that shows that. Even when Musica obviously doesn't fill a niche anymore because of new technology, things like Spotify and Netflix, and I mean, we're all aware of these new things, but they managed to wind down the company properly, or that section of the company at a profit, and hopefully they've been able to find jobs for the people who worked at Musica and other divisions of Clicks, which owns Musica. So, but that's exactly it. I mean, as Chris says, the things like the SOEs aren't subject to market forces. They can just keep going to the government for bailouts. They don't have to, be efficient. They don't have to run things properly. And I don't know if the penny's dropping in the government, but I think eventually the weight of reality will actually cause the penny to drop. And, short of starting to print money at the Reserve Bank, which luckily still seems pretty unlikely at the moment, I think...
but they want to.
I think there's still good people at the Reserve Bank. And I think Lesotho Kganyago is at the moment, one of the greatest South Africans alive, and he's probably a lot of pressure on the guy. But I think eventually the weight of reality will actually mean things like SIA and whatever you don't fly anymore. And so I think it's I'm not sure if there's actually any movement. I don't think people in the government are actually changing their minds. I just think the ideology is coming up against reality, and I think immovable force is meeting an unstoppable object in this case.
Absolutely. Guys, we've run out of time. So what I'm going to do is I want to give everybody the last word. We'll probably run over, but that's fine, as long as we each get the last word, including what you'll be looking at in the upcoming week and how do the people reach you. Ernst, let me begin with you.
All right. So maybe just my final thoughts on tonight would be definitely that people need to get active. People need to start getting involved. I know there's a lot of things going on around you that might make you feel despair or might make you feel hopeless, but there are also a lot of people doing things behind the scenes, fighting the good fight and really putting the pressure on this corrupt and immoral government. And I think you should start describing it in that way. It's no longer that the government is just incompetent or that there's something, the government's just doing some things a little bit off. No, it is a corrupt, immoral government or ruling party rather, and you should start describing it like that and start treating them like that. Same with when we were talking about the false accusations of racism. You are ever the victim of a false racism accusation, and you know for a fact that it's false. You need to treat it like it is a criminal accusation, like someone just called you a murderer or a rapist. Don't just crawl back into your little hole and say, "Oh, please don't call me all those mean things." You need to stand your ground, and that brings me to my final point in regards to get active, get involved, start supporting organizations that are fighting back, start helping to centralize power, not in the government, but rather in. I mean, let's face it. The ANC are masters at power centralization. They every day. I don't think there's ever been a day in the ANC's history when they've ruled where they've given power back to the people and not given more power put more power in the government's hands. So we need to start becoming power centralizers in regards to centralizing power in non-government organizations, civil society, and in your communities and in your the people around you and in your household, rather than just leaving the government to have a monopoly on power. Start becoming power accumulators yourselves in anything that is just not government affiliated. Then it will be excellent. So in regards to, I don't know, Sihle, if this is the section where we also say where people can reach us.
Yeah, please.
All right. So if you like my inputs here tonight, I also have a YouTube channel called Conscious Caracal, where I interview interesting guests in regards to topics that are relevant to South Africa and the wider world. And you can go subscribe there if that sounds good to you. I'm 50 subscribers away from 6,000, so that'll help out a lot. And then also you can follow me on Twitter, also Conscious Caracal, and you can find all my thoughts there. But yeah, Sihle, thank you very much for having me on. It was an excellent discussion. I always enjoy the guests. You have an impeccable taste in guests. I always enjoy the conversations that we have on this channel. So thank you very much. And God bless everyone and Godspeed for the future as well against this power-hungry regime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, my brother, for joining us. Of course, we're at Gabriel, my brother. Last thoughts? And of course, how do we reach you, brother?
Yeah, so I just want to say I've enjoyed myself. You know, we've talked about heavy stuff. It's been important stuff. It's been pertinent. And it's also been a pleasure because it's reasonable and there's more joy and wisdom than in tomfoolery, ultimately. So enjoy yourselves, guys. It's warm inside this tent of non-racial, reasonable, work together, common sense. And I think all of these platforms offer that. We offer a bit of that. Our podcast is called Two Crickets and a Thorn Tree with Nicholas Lorimer. You can find us on the Daily Friend and enjoy yourself. I dare you to look up www.racismisnottheproblem.coza in the next couple of days. Do it tomorrow night. Do it when you see this. And enjoy yourself, because it is a very pleasant thing to know that we as people have got it figured out. And that our problem is not our neighbors. Our problem is our overlords. And once you've identified your problem, you can solve it. And I want us to do that. So, yeah, that's me.
Absolutely. Thank you to brother Gabriel there. Let me come to you, Marius. Firstly, thank you, brother, for being on the show. How do we reach you, and what are you going to be looking out for in the coming week?
I just want to echo what Ernst and Gabriel said. I think you got a great tasting guest, and y'all also had a lot of fun here tonight. People can find my work and Gabriel's work as well at the Daily Friend. That's dailyfriend.co.za. You can follow us on Twitter, Daily Friend SA, or you can also follow me on Twitter if you want. So that's at Marius Roodt. And the Daily Friend's also on Facebook. Just go to the search bar and put in Daily Friend. And I think Ernst also just echo what he said. You know, look to organizations that are standing up for your rights and so on. And I mean, there's an important couple of weeks coming in. With things like the expropriation without compensation, the Firearms Bill. And just on a general note, something I'm going to be looking out for this week is what's happening in Israel with the formation of the new Israeli government. It looks like could be finally the end of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, and he's been the longest serving prime minister. He came to power in 2009, but it looks like he could be the end of Benjamin Netanyahu. So that's something I'll be watching this week from international affairs perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm looking out for also, because it will have massive implications for security in that part of the world. But let me not get into that right now. Joe, my brother, final word, and how do we reach you on the show?
Oh, well, firstly, let me say thanks again, Sekle, for having me. It was an honor. Also, my debut on the show. Thanks again. And great guests. I'm a fan of all of you guys. And people can reach me easily. Joe Emilio, Google me, Joe Emilio, The Joe Emilio Show on YouTube. I have a website, www.joeemilio.co.za, so you should find me easily. And also catch Sekle on my show tomorrow evening on The Joe Emilio Show at 9 p.m. We'll be discussing Israel and Palestine, that conflict, going into Sekle's travels to Israel and a lot more other things as well. So please join me on my show tomorrow with Sekle or Big Daddy Liberty.
Absolutely. As you heard it, it's a date. Make sure you find us on the Joe Emilio Show tomorrow. Chris, last but not least, my brother, how do we reach you? And final thoughts?
Thank you very much, Sekle, and to the fellow panelists this evening. Always an honor to be in such knowledgeable company and such rarefied air. So thank you to all of you. You can find all of my work at www.freemarketfoundation.com, along with all our fellow writers, analysts, and researchers. We had a new research paper out about the NHI, so I recommend that you go and find that under the healthcare section on our website. You can also find me on Facebook and on Twitter. Please follow me there. And just in terms of looking ahead a bit, there's a probability that we're going to see the first unemployment stats of 2021, the first quarter of this year, later this week. And at the moment, it's expected that those numbers are going to be up. So the FMF will be doing quite a bit of analysis on that. So sorry to end on a negative note, but if you want to come for the analysis, come to the FMF. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. There you have it. That has been another episode of Liberty and Friends. A final thank you once again to all of my participants here on the show. And thank you for watching another episode of Liberty and Friends. Hey, ta-da. It's always a fun and eye-opening show. You know, you always know that at the end of your week on a Sunday evening at 8 p.m., your favorite fat boy, Big Daddy Liberty, will be on your screens to unpack what would have been the news week that was. So with that being said, shout out to you guys for watching the show. Just a quick reminder, you will see me on tomorrow's show, the Joe Emilio Show. We'll have a chat about Israel on his show, and again, the conflict in that part of the world, and more importantly, how can it realistically be solved? There are, honest to God, or really practical ways in which that part of the world can reach a two-state solution, or as I preferably want to have, a more sort of federal system in that part of the world that allows people to govern themselves and ends the war. So I'll have that conversation tomorrow on the Joe Emilio Show. Please join us, and you'll find me next week once again with 2 vlogs. We're going to be hitting the streets of Johannesburg, talking to you, the ordinary Joe Burger, about your rights. Are they being infringed when it comes in particular to the issue of the Firearms Amendment Bill? Maybe you're a firearm owner. I'll be talking to a cross-section of society, from taxi owners to ordinary people to people who maybe use firearms for their work, security of individuals. What are your thoughts about Bheki Cele, the asshat's attempt via his ANC government to disarm us as citizens? So look forward to that. That'll be the Wednesday show of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. And I'll also then see you again next Sunday for Liberty and Friends. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, guys. Super appreciated. Please, before you leave, hit that like button. And thanks for watching. Let me just end the show by reminding you, please, to never trust a commie.